With the elections just over a month away, Congressman Schiff and other Democrats are pushing for major legislation to prevent presidential abuses of power, among other reforms. Congress took similar action in the post-Watergate era. The congressman joins us to talk about his recent op-ed in the LA Times in which he made the case for reform. Congressman, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
You talked about these being guardrails that have to be put on our democracy because this president doesn't follow norms. But many of his supporters say that's why they voted for him in the first place.
I don't think that's right. I think a lot of people voted for him because they thought he was going to drain the swamp. In fact, he's turned that swamp into a cesspool of violating the independence of the Justice Department, firing inspector generals who are trying to clean up that cesspool, retaliating against whistleblowers, politicizing the justice system, giving commutation of sentences to people who lie under oath to cover up for him. That's not what people supported him for. That's, I think, why people are fleeing from him now.
There are three basic pillars that you talked about in this op-ed. Let's start with curbing the abuse of presidential powers. Specifically, what situations inspired you, and what do you hope to solve for, and how?
Well, a number of things. It was the abuse of the Justice Department, where the president and attorney general intervened in the case of Roger Stone or Michael Flynn to protect people who had lied to cover up for the president. It was the president's use of his office to enrich himself from foreign powers that are staying at his hotel in Washington to curry favor with him, that violate the constitutional provision on emoluments. And it was the firing of inspector generals who were exposing wrongdoing, and a whole host of other abuses that, like after Watergate and Nixon's abuses, the Congress needs to respond to restore our checks and balances.
Just to be really specific about one of those particulars, let's say pardons. How would you judge whether a pardon was abusive or not?
Well, we do a couple of things. One way to judge if an abuse is abuse is abusive is to see, is this the president himself pardoning himself or a member of the president's family? And if so, the investigative files need to be provided to the Congress so they can determine, is this the president obstructing justice by pardoning witnesses who would be witnesses against him or his family? And you can also, as we do in this legislation, criminalize the use of the pardon as part of a bribe. That is, the president shouldn't be able to say, if you lie for me under oath, I will pardon you. That should be prosecutable.
You also want to reinforce our system of checks and balances. And as you wrote, the founders were very intentional about the separation of powers. Talk a little bit about how those separations have been eroded and how you would fix it.
This is one of the most important provisions, and that is Congress can't do its oversight if it can't issue subpoenas and ensure that they're complied with. The administration has stonewalled all the congressional subpoenas and said, basically, we don't view you as a co-equal branch of government. We're not going to comply. No administration has ever done that before. If they're allowed to, it means the end of congressional oversight, and it means the end of accountability and transparency and a lot more corruption in the administration. So this bill would expedite enforcement of congressional subpoenas. They'd go straight to a three-judge panel, and then we'd go straight from that three-judge panel to the Supreme Court.
In 2016, while campaigning, President Trump, then candidate Trump, publicly asked Russia to go after Hillary Clinton's emails.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
You say that that was a foreign intervention in our elections, and what would you do, what would this bill do to make sure that can't happen again? Remember, the president says, I was just joking.
Well, it makes it very clear that it's criminal to seek foreign assistance in an election. It also requires you to report to federal authorities if you're having contact with a foreign power about an election. So it tries to put in additional safeguards. Tragically, the president went way beyond inviting Russian interference in 2016 to now seeking to coerce Ukraine to help him cheat in the election by withholding military aid, acts which ended up getting him impeached.
Would this bill do anything to require the disclosure of debts by candidates? We now know that the president, according to the New York Times release of those tax returns, may have hundreds of millions of dollars of debts coming due.
You know, that's a good question. I don't know that this has a provision that would be directly on point to that very disturbing revelation that the president has hundreds of millions of dollars in debts coming due. We don't know who's guaranteeing those loans. We don't know who owns the president's debts, and therefore may make a call on the president in terms of warping U.S. policy in some other nation's benefit for financial reasons. So there needs to be much greater disclosure.
And this finally is something I don't know how you solve for, but it's about polarization and partisanship. Partisanship on the Hill and polarization in our society, often stoked by foreign interference in social media or their own algorithms that monetize our likes and our clicks. How do you move forward and reestablish that sense of cooperation that used to be the norm?
You know, I think to an extraordinary degree, the president sets the tone for the Congress and for the country. I think a different president who is trying to be the president of all the United States, not just red states or blue states, a president who is firmly trying to bridge the divide rather than aggravate divisions in the country, will go a long way to healing those divisions. I also think that the package of reforms that you're asking about, our post-Watergate reforms, will have bipartisan support next year if there's a Biden administration, because Republican members of Congress won't want a Biden administration to do any of the things the Trump administration has done. So I think we will see much greater bipartisan support for a restoration of checks and balances.
Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.